Tonight on Frontline,
How are you, Fidel?
he calls Castro his idol
Very well, thank you, and you? Very well.
and the United States an enemy.
He's convinced George Bush goes to bed thinking of ways to assassinate Hugo Chavez.
To his followers, he is Venezuela's hope. To his critics, he is at worst a dictator and at best a master of the media.
He sings, he can be funny, he can seem buffoonish. He obeys none of the rules for what is expected of a head of state, or for that matter, a public official on television.
La CIA anda regada por todos lados. Hace poco me dijo Fidel Chávez, cuídate, porque esta es la máquina de matar más perfecta que se haya inventado.
Is he a real threat to America?
Venezuela is selling about 1.5 million barrels per day of crude and products to the United States.
Or is he his own worst enemy?
Despite many billions of dollars of oil wealth, we see in fact that most of Hugo Chavez's revolutionary programs simply have not worked.
Tonight on Frontline, who is Hugo Chavez? Flying into Caracas, we were worried. The idea was to do a story about Venezuela, about oil and politics, and its controversial president, Hugo Chavez. But we'd been told that we should not expect to meet with him. We needn't have worried. President Chavez, we found out, was everywhere.
A nuestro norte, el Caribe Mar, Caracas hacia el suroeste. Y ahí está la primera ciudad socialista. Vaya ese aplauso.
The president can always be found on his weekly television show, A lo Presidente.
Aló, presidente, número 291, domingo 26 de agosto. ¿Qué tal? ¿Qué tal, muchachos? Aquí estamos, miren, qué maravilla.
Every Sunday, President Chavez talks to the people. He lets them in on all his plans, memories, secrets, and pet peeves. Every week from a different place, every week a different subject. Even if to the uninitiated ear, it sometimes all sounds the same. It's not what we would call a presidential address. In fact, it's not easy to explain it at all.
Bueno, es un show.
Well, in the first place, it's a show. That's how it's advertised in the press, as a variety show.
De variedades.
He obeys none of the normal ground rules for what is expected of a head of state, or for that matter, a public official on television.
He tells stories about his youth, he sings. It starts when the president decides it starts, and it finishes when he's ready to finish. It has no timetable.
Aló, presidente número 295. ¿Cómo están ustedes, amigas? ¿Cómo están mis amigas y mis amigos este domingo bonito?
It has a rough script, but it's basically the president improvising.
Yo ya me imagino los cerros de Caracas dentro de 5 años, dentro de 8 años, dentro de 10 años.
Y puede pasarse 5 horas.
5 hours go by. He is entertaining, affecting, confronting. He always keeps the tension.
Yo insisto, mire, aunque me quede mudo de tanto hablar, pero nunca me cansaré. Aunque sude y sude y sude, aunque pase 1000 horas en 1000 aló presidente, pero estamos en una oportunidad irrepetible.
Chavez is easily caricatured because he can be funny, he can seem buffoonish on his Hello Presidentes. He sings, he gets involved in wordplay, he goes on too long, he does all of these things in public. He's probably the world's first virtual president in the age of the communication revolution.
La llanura me mandó que le cantara a Caracas algo que fuera bonito.
Hugo Chavez started his program on March 2, 2008 at 11 in the morning with a song. He walked the empty streets of Caracas with his Minister of Interior and the mayor of the city.
Cuando por el llano andaba, cruzando cielo y sabana, ese ilustre y gran señor.
This week's program was about security, or rather the lack of it, in the city of Caracas, and it went on calmly for 2 hours. Then, at 1 o'clock, he began complaining about Colombia bombing a guerrilla camp in Ecuador the day before, killing an important Colombian guerrilla fighter, Raúl Reyes.
Mataron al número 2 de la FARC, a un buen revolucionario que fue Raúl Reyes. Lo conocí personalmente. Lo conocí personalmente.
He then made it clear what he thought of the president of Colombia, Álvaro Uribe, who ordered the bombing.
El presidente Uribe es un criminal. Es un criminal. No solo es que es un mentiroso, un mafioso, un paramilitar, y dirige un narcogobierno, y dirige un gobierno lacayo del imperio norteamericano. Es un subordinado de Bush. Uribe hace lo que le manda hacer Bush.
In fact, Chavez thought that President Uribe was so objectionable that at around 1:50, he ordered a surprise general to send 10 battalions of troops, together with tanks and fighter jets, to the Colombian border.
Muévame 10 batallones hacia la frontera con Colombia, de inmediato.
Él es muy impulsivo. Él lo domina su lengua.
He's very impulsive, dominated by his tongue.
Entonces suelta cosas de las
So he
cuales
comes
después
out with
las
things that he
piensa,
has to
después
take back.
Teodoro Petkov was a minister in the former government. Once a communist, he's now the editor of a left-wing paper called Tal Cual.
Él dijo un día, vamos a salirnos del Fondo Monetario Internacional.
One day he said, "We're going to get out of the International Monetary Fund."
¿Dónde encontró coraje?
Someone, I don't know where he got the courage,
Se lo debe haber dicho con un hilo de voz.
said, "President, if we get out of the monetary fund,
La deuda pública, que
the
son
public
30
debt is going to be
billones
$30 billion,
se hace exigible.
and we have to pay the next day,
Tenemos que pagar unos
and we don't have the money."
No volvemos a
Well,
hablar
he
más.
never talked about it again.
As for the war he'd declared on Colombia, 5 days later at a Latin American summit, everybody shook everybody's hands. The war was over. We arrived in Venezuela well after Chavez had announced his intention to turn his country into a model of socialism for the 21st century. The revolution was not easily apparent. New cars stuck in heavy traffic, and people in the heart of Caracas shopping and shopping. The president did not seem to approve.
Y tenemos que cuidarnos del consumismo. Que la tendencia nuestra es a esa, porque es la maldición capitalista con la que nos envenenaron. Gastemos solo lo necesario. ¿Cómo que llaman estos carros grandes, últimos? Homer. Ni $1 para importar Homer. ¿Qué es eso, chico? ¿Qué es eso? ¿Y qué revolución es esta? Pues, la de los Homer. Que no. Esto es una revolución de verdad, compadre. De verdad.
¿Cuál de todos los Chávez que
Which one of all the
conocemos es el
Chávezes we
más
know is most authentic?
Y yo tampoco lo tengo.
I don't have an
claro.
answer.
Creo que cada vez va a ser
It's becoming
más
harder to
difícil,
say.
Porque Chávez es un mito en construcción. Chávez
Because
está
Chavez
como
is a myth in
ahorita,
progress.
En este momento, entrando como en el territorio
He's entering
del
into
mito,
mythic
y él
territory.
mismo, creo que se ve.
I think he sees himself
mismo
as
de
being
otra
different.
manera. Él quiere
He
ser una
wants to be a
leyenda.
legend.
Chavez grew up in Barinas, on the Llanos, the plains. The llanero is the cowboy of Venezuela.
El llanero es un hombre de a caballo.
The llanero is a man on a horse. He's a man who really lives on his horse.
Pero el llano es el
The
epicentro de
plains
casi
are the
todas
center
las
of almost
leyendas y
all our
los
legends and myths.
Casi todos los cuentos. El llanero le gusta mucho los
The
cuentos.
llanero likes stories,
Construir mitología.
and he likes to construct mythologies.
Pero Chávez es un llanero clásico.
Chavez is a
Su-
classic
de su manera
llanero,
de cómo él
in the way he
construye su
talks,
discurso,
how he
de
combines
cómo él
truths
combina
with
verdades
half-truths.
con medias verdades. Es
It's a
un
little
poco
like the
ese género
genre
que ha
made
puesto ahora
popular
de
by
moda
Garcia Marquez,
Márquez, que llaman
magical
el
realism,
realismo de la
or
historia.
fabled history.
Lo primero es que le gusten.
Rafael Simón Jiménez, a former vice president of the parliament until he broke with Chavez, grew up in Barinas and knew the Chavez family well.
Chávez es un hombre que le gusta mucho
Chavez
los
likes the
instrumentos
classic
musicales
instruments of the
mexicanos,
llanos, the cuatro, the maracas,
el
the
arpa.
harp.
Chávez se convirtió en el epicentro del pueblo.
Chavez became the center of the life in town because he organized the parties. He organized the dances,
Un hombre típico del llano.
a typical man of the llanos.
Politics was not part of his life.
Él siempre tuvo una afición.
He always had a
por
liking
el
for
béisbol,
baseball,
que es el deporte
the most important
por
Venezuelan
excelencia de
sport.
los venezolanos.
He was talented and dreamed of becoming a famous pitcher. But at 20, he gave up that dream and joined the Army. There, he met a small group of officers who were interested in politics. One of them was Jesus Urdaneta.
Bueno, la amistad con Hugo Chávez empezó hace muchísimos años.
Our friendship began a long time ago, when we were in the military academy.
Y allí nace,
And that's where what is called the Bolivarian movement was born,
el movimiento bolivariano como grupo.
as a group of young military men who set up goals based on the problems of the country.
La problemática del país.
They called it the Bolivarian movement, after their hero, Venezuelan-born Simón Bolívar, liberator of South American republics from Spanish rule. They said they wanted to now liberate their country from years of corruption and inequality.
The poor of Venezuela streamed out of the shanty towns on the outskirts of the capital after hearing of price rises in transport.
On February 27, 1989, Caracas erupted. It was the culmination of years of a declining economy, government corruption, and increasing poverty. It was called the Caracazo.
Y nosotros como Fuerza Armada,
We, the armed forces, were sent to quell the situation, all the anarchy that was going on.
Eso para nosotros fue muy
It was
duro,
very
fue
hard
muy
on us,
triste,
very
porque
sad,
como miembros de las Fuerzas Armadas teníamos que estar de alguna manera
because as members of the
presionando.
armed forces, we had to put pressure on the Venezuelan population in coercive ways.
Y eso fue muy significativo para
It
nosotros.
was a very important
desde el
event
punto de
for
vista
us
de
in
empezar
terms
a
of beginning to
pensar
think
en
about
la
taking
toma del
power.
porque
We
veíamos
realized
que
that
todas
all
las
the
vías se
roads were
bloqueaban
barred
y
and
no
that there
había
was
la
no
posibilidad de
possibility of
cambio.
change.
Todo estaba
It
cerrado.
was all closed,
Entonces
that
creímos
the
que la
only
única
possibility
posibilidad
was
era
to rise
insurgir.
up.
3 years later, they did. With a few officers, they staged a coup on the night of February 4th, 1992. Urdaneta was to the southwest of the capital, while Chavez was in command of the forces in Caracas. It lasted one night. In the morning, Chavez suddenly surrendered.
El comandante Chávez les dé un mensaje a estos
He had one condition. He wanted to go on the air, he said, and send a message to his comrades to put down their arms in order to stop the bloodshed.
Primero que nada, quiero dar buenos días a todo el pueblo de Venezuela. Y este mensaje bolivariano va dirigido a los valientes soldados que se
The
encuentran.
short speech electrified Venezuela.
Qué hombre que no durmió.
A man who didn't sleep that night,
Que tiene a todos los
who just had a military failure. He starts greeting the people as if it were a program. Good morning to everyone. There was something different, something special.
Compañeros, lamentablemente, por ahora, los objetivos que nos planteamos no fueron logrados en la ciudad capital.
Chávez asumió la responsabilidad del golpe,
Chavez took responsibility for the coup,
reconoció la derrota
admitted the defeat,
y además trazó.
and then outlined his intention for the future.
Bueno, por
ahora,
estamos
for now,
derrotados,
we have failed.
Pero vendrán nuevas batallas.
But we are not giving up the battle.
Entró como lluvia en un campo.
This came like rain on dry soil.
Seco, ¿no?
Y yo, ante el país y ante ustedes, asumo la responsabilidad de este movimiento militar bolivariano. Muchas gracias.
Urdaneta was shocked and mortified.
Entonces, claro, cuando yo mantenía mi posición
I was holding my position when it came on television that he was calling for the surrender.
Por supuesto que para mí yo lo consideré una gran traición.
For me, it was treason. I thought, how is it possible that yesterday we hugged and promised to fight till the end, and Chavez surrendered so easily?
Por supuesto que para mí fue una gran decepción.
For me, it was a great disappointment, something I never expected.
Chavez fracasa militarmente.
Chavez failed militarily, totally.
Es el único de todos los
He's the only one of the leaders who failed.
pero triunfa mediáticamente.
But he triumphed in
Y
the
eso
media.
lo salva políticamente, es decir, el Chávez
The
público
public
que
Chavez
nace
who was born
no nace
was not born out of a military or political victory,
por el rey.
but out of the
Entonces,
ratings.
si alguien tiene que estar consciente
So if
de
anyone is aware of the importance of the media, it is Hugo Chavez.
Chavez and his co-conspirators were held in prison for 2.5 years without a trial, until a new president took office and dismissed the case. They were released in March 1994. Chavez's family was waiting. So were his fans. He clearly seemed like a potential leader. But what were his politics?
Él salió de la cárcel por ese viejo esquema que la izquierda
He left prison with the old theory of the traditional left in Venezuela.
y es que para llegar al poder con un mensaje
That to get to power and change the system, you had to take up
del
arms.
país era necesario tomar las armas.
Luis Michelena was a well-known political figure, a former communist leader who believed that changes could be made in a democratic way. He had visited Chavez in prison and was impressed. Now he gave him a political education. He also gave him a warning.
Que si él lo que quería era una revolución,
If Chavez wanted a radical revolution Cuban style,
estilo cubano, o
or was thinking of installing a communist government,
un régimen comunista, por supuesto que no
that would
tenía
not be
viabilidad.
possible in the democratic system of Venezuela.
Yo creo que eso es fundamental.
This, I think, is fundamental,
Creía en la posibilidad armada,
because Chavez still believed in the possibility of a military solution. He was very rigid, and he felt that elections were not the way to go.
y Luis Michelena es quien lo
And Luis
convence.
Michelena convinced him.
Claro, el olfato
Of course, someone with the political instinct of Luis Michelena,
personaje tenía 40
who
años
had spent
de
40
lucha
years in political battles,
vale decir que era un hombre
was very
muy
qualified from
aficionado
this
de
point
ese
of view.
punto de vista.
Nedo Panis, an architect who was sympathetic to the attempted coup and who had given Chavez a room in his house after prison, had some doubts about Chavez, but he deferred to Michelena.
Tuvo el olfato de decir,
He said, "This man has charisma."
carisma, este señor penetra
He had penetrated the consciousness of the Venezuelan people,
y llevado a la política y
and so bringing and
presentarlo a la
introducing him to the political arena can be beneficial to us.
So, under the tutelage of Michelena, Chavez became the voice of the young military generation, ready to give up their arms
Insurgir en armas para
in search of new democratic paths.
y buscar nuevos caminos. Aquí venimos
He
entonces
understood the power of mass media.
con los medios de comunicación. Tienen para nosotros prioridad fundamental porque son un arma para la lucha ideológica y un arma para decirle al pueblo las expectativas que todos nosotros tenemos.
The elections of 1998 happened in a moment very difficult for Venezuela. The prices of oil had gone down to historic lows. People radicalized. They wanted something new, something fresh. And they found in this man a radical discourse. He said he would get rid forever of the old elites.
With Michelena as the architect of his campaign, he ran as the outsider, the non-politician in a country which had come to distrust politicians. The media loved him, and he loved them back.
Todos los medios de comunicación de Venezuela lo respaldaron.
All the media supported him.
Le dieron amplísima.
They gave him huge amounts of newspaper space and hours on television.
Nosotros representamos la esperanza del pueblo. He ahí la explicación de nuestra popularidad.
He won big. On February 2nd, 1999, the former insurgent walked with his supporters to Miraflores Palace. The country that Chavez inherited had the largest conventional oil reserves in the Western Hemisphere. A rich country with a poor society. There were millions who lived in abject poverty. The main challenge of the new government was to share the oil wealth with the poor. It was not an easy task in a country as polarized as Venezuela.
Caracas is a city where there are nice homes like the one we're sitting in. And then if we had a view, we would look out to hilltops covered with shacks where people live miserably. And that's the reality here. The Democratic majority in Venezuela lives in shacks. And therefore, the populist message and revolutionary message of Hugo Chavez holds a special kind of appeal to those people.
Francia Urbina is poor, but she feels she has a mission.
What do I believe? That dreams will become a reality. These dreams that every Venezuelan has. Because there are many others like me. I know that these dreams will become a reality.
Francia is a neighborhood leader. She keeps her Christmas lights on, she says, to commemorate the time she had no lights. She is involved in all of the community's problems. No electricity here, no water there.
I'm a social worker who helps all the communities. I'm involved everywhere, even nationally. I have influence in City Hall. I have a green light so that I can help those who need it most.
Among other things, she runs a soup kitchen. Every day, she and some helpers cook meals for the neighborhood poor. She is now paid by the government, but she had done it before without pay and says she would do it again if she had to, for the people, and of course, for Chavez.
I love him. I love him from top to bottom to the sides. My children get angry with me. Why do you always wear everything red? Red boots, red cap, red shirt? Since the 11th, I started dressing like this.
The Once, the 11th of April, 2002, is a date no one in Venezuela can ever forget. It was the beginning of an attempt to overthrow President Chavez. The tensions between Chavez and his opposition surfaced in his third year of office. In November 2001, Chavez had pushed through 49 laws by decree. Two of the most important were the oil law, which doubled the royalties paid to the government, and the land reform law, which allowed expropriations.
Overnight, the opposition went from a loyal opposition that criticized Chavez but accepted his presidency to aggressive protests on the streets. And shortly after that, they were calling for his overthrow. And that led into the coup.
An estimated 500,000 people marched towards the presidential palace. Francia and her friends were watching on television.
We were at home, and we had very strong doubts. Almost all the media who were against the revolutionary process were saying incoherent things, things that weren't true, lies.
The independent television stations who had once supported Chavez were now vehemently against him. When violence erupted, they gave voice to the opposition against the president, now holed up in the palace.
Este llamado es a la reflexión y a buscar un camino de conciliación en torno.
Chavez's speech, which was meant to reassure the population, was promptly contrasted with a split screen showing the violence in the streets. By Friday, the president was said to be isolated, detained, and taken from the palace by members of the army who had turned against him. There were rumors that he had agreed to resign. The Inspector General of the Armed Forces announced it on television. We asked the president to resign. His resignation has been accepted. Pedro Carmona, a wealthy businessman, was installed as interim president. All public authorities were dissolved. There were strong rumors that the opposition had the blessing, if not the help, of the United States. Francia and her friends were frantic.
We took to the streets. We couldn't take it anymore. We went on foot, unarmed, with only our hearts on our sleeves. Where is our president? Where is Hugo Chavez Frias?
Everybody was going for, how can I tell you, for a cause. It was the president. We left the doors open. There were no thieves, no looting. Here, everybody was for the leader.
On Saturday, the tide turned. The army, already divided, was having second thoughts. While the people of the surrounding shanty towns were streaming toward the palace, calling for their leader.
When we saw the military helicopters on the roof of Miraflores, they had the flags, and we said, it's true, it's our president.
47 hours after the attempted coup began, the army flew Chavez back to the palace, where the people were clamoring for him.
We want to see Chavez. We want to see Chavez. We want to see Chavez. That was so impressive. From the heart.
People, adults, old people, the paralyzed, the blind. It was the people. The people had put him there, and the people will keep him there.
Chavez was back. He was conciliatory.
Las causas de esto que ha ocurrido ya las analizaremos con calma para corregir donde haya que corregir, para corregirnos donde tengamos que corregirnos. Pero mientras tanto, calma.
But the main issue had not been resolved. The wealth of the country, the distribution of the oil revenues. The oil industry, nationalized in 1976, was managed by Petroleo de Venezuela, known as PDVSA, a state company which was identified with the country's elite. It was PDVSA's management that led the opposition in the attempted coup, and they still wanted Chavez out. He would need all the help he could get. He found it in an unlikely place.
Pedro, es Wilmer Ruperti, ¿cómo estás? Sí. Sí,
Wilmer Ruperti is one of the richest men in Venezuela. He is an oil man, yet he is the one who came to the president's aid in his moment of crisis.
I was working more or less 13 to 14 years in PDVSA. My friends were from there, but you cannot be over the country. You cannot be over the government. You cannot be over the people who are elected democratically in order to satisfy the needs of the population that was very poor. PDVSA made a mistake, big mistake.
In December 2002, PDVSA decided to shut down. 90% of the employees, workers, and executives went on strike. They were supported by the country's big businesses and unions.
They felt they were so powerful because they were the ones in control of the oil company that they kept on thinking that he would fall the following day, and the president did not fall.
The president held on, barely. The strike went on for days, then weeks. The ports looked ghostly. The ships stood still. Oil couldn't go out. Gasoline couldn't come in. Other parts of the economy suffered. Most factories had to shut down. Multinational operations closed. Little by little, the country was paralyzed. Wilmer Ruperti decided to help the president.
Everybody in PDVSA was against the president. I have many friends in PDVSA. I told them not to do it. And nobody cares. Nobody cares at that moment about my opinion. And I say, well, I'm sorry, but I have to be against you, and you are my friends, but besides that, I cannot accept that situation.
He used his contacts and influence with the shipping companies to rent tankers and ferry gasoline and oil in and out of Venezuela.
What I did was bringing the vessels needed in Venezuela to be loaded and bringing the gasoline as well to be consumed by the people.
Once the oil began to flow safely, the other tankers joined in. The back of the strike was broken. As for Wilmer Ruperti, he did well for himself. He was decorated by Chavez and went from having one tanker to having 19, from being an unknown businessman to an oil magnate. He is said to have made his money because of his close relations with the government. He denies it.
My relation is a standard relation with the government. 25 years ago, I started my business in oil, and I am maintaining myself in oil.
Terrina de remolacha con tomate, vegetales y salmón ahumado, vinagretas de albahaca. Pimientos.
The press calls him a boligarch, one of a new class of wealthy oligarchs rising on the back of the Bolivarian Revolution. They print allegations of questionable deals and undue profits. He says he doesn't care. All he wants now is to do what he enjoys most, write and listen to poetry, believing that the best is yet to come.
Eres en mí como la primavera que deja su fugaz enredadera sobre la huerta de mi corazón.
Yes, we are going to do something better. We are going to be a better country thanks to Chavez.
Things were not better for PDVSA. It was payback time for Chavez. The old company was decimated.
20,000 people, 50% of the personnel of the oil industry was dismissed. They brought around 30,000 people, new people, without any knowledge at all. They don't produce the oil they were producing before. They are not refining the same amount of oil they were refining before, and they are doing a lot of things which don't have anything to do with the oil sector.
PDVSA is an instrument of the government, not only the government. PDVSA is an instrument, a direct instrument unconditional instrument of the president, of Hugo Chavez.
Chavez can use that money for political purposes outside Venezuela. When Chavez goes to any place and he promises $100 million, or $50 million, that money comes from PDVSA. And that money at the end comes from the United States and comes from other countries because you pay for the oil.
60% of Venezuela's oil is bought and paid for by the U.S., money that helps Chavez subsidize Central American leaders who are hostile to U.S. policy in the region. Among them, Daniel Ortega of Nicaragua, Rafael Correa of Ecuador, Evo Morales of Bolivia, and most of all, Fidel Castro of Cuba. Determined to realign his country away from the United States, Chavez has forged alliances with countries like China, made arms deals with Russia, and embraced Iran. But a good chunk of the money would go towards his socialist vision at home.
Casi todos ellos y ellas estaban desempleados, en la miseria.
The ideas were worthy and generous. Healthcare, education, training programs called misiones. People with no work skills were paid to be trained and helped to a job, socialist style.
Y el modelo socialista venezolano las impulsa, el cooperativismo. Entonces nació la misión Vuelvan Cara. Hoy se están graduando cientos.
On March 29, 2007, Chavez celebrated that year's graduating class from the program Vuelvan Caras, Turn Around.
Levanten la mano a ver los que se gradúan hoy y reciben un crédito de 77.
After a year of training, these graduates received certificates and government loans to set up their textile cooperative.
Saludos a todos. Ahí tienes también tu libreta de ahorro del crédito.
Núcleo Endógeno in the west of Caracas is a cluster of cooperatives recommended to foreign visitors. It was founded in 2003. There were 220 workers in the textile cooperative when it started. Today, there are 105. All women, mostly single mothers. Their average salary is $240 a month, and 75% of the work is ordered by the government. But other cooperatives are not that lucky. 3 years ago, Maria Moreno and her colleagues also graduated from Vuelvan Caras and also established a textile cooperative. The machines are clean and ready, but most of the people are gone. There were 59 of them 3 years ago. Now there are less than 10.
When the cooperative began, the government gave us work, the same as the misiones. But afterwards, they no longer gave us any resources or work.
They only make about $150 a month. Maria Rengifo says that after 3 years in the cooperative, she still doesn't make enough money to live.
I'm among the poorest people in Venezuela. The president has to know, in order to form a cooperative, we have to have income.
A major problem is that they know almost nothing about business.
At no time did they teach us how to develop a business, how to keep going.
Without marketing experience, they are waiting for the orders to come to them.
If there's no more work, busted. In Venezuela, we say that, busted, without friends and without money.
Entonces yo digo que el presidente, insisto, que el presidente Hugo Chávez Frías.
So I say that President Hugo Chávez Frías, Venezuelan, has to advocate for the cooperatives. He has to know what's going on. Why aren't they working? Why aren't they producing? Why isn't there anything to produce?
Como es una sociedad sin auditoría.
This is a society that has no auditing.
Se gasta en qué,
There's no idea how much money is being spent.
No se sabe cuál es el resultado real.
We don't know the real results of cooperatives, what they produce or don't produce.
Y lo que se sabe es porque
We only know what Chavez tells us.
But Chavez doesn't tell, and perhaps doesn't even know, what's really happening in his programs. In October 2007, the first stage of an ambitious housing project in a place called La Suiza was completed. It was celebrated on A lo Presidente.
Buenos días, presidente. Nos encontramos con la comunidad del sector La Suiza.
The Minister of Housing introduced the project as part of a plan called the Gran Caracas.
En su momento del denominado Plan Caracas.
The Minister of Mines expressed the gratitude of the community who, for the first time, had access to decent housing. He proclaimed the houses awesome.
Estas son tremenda vivienda, de verdad.
The president was delighted.
Las nuevas villas, las nuevas comunas, Diosito mediante, toda Caracas estará así.
Fíjense, aquí entramos, la sala, aquí está la sala inicialmente.
They toured the interior of the houses and praised the attention to details and workmanship.
Tiene unas baldosas de granito que es muchísimo más duradero. Aquí está la sala.
But the man who had built 7 of these houses wasn't there to celebrate.
Bueno, el presupuesto era 11 millones por cada vivienda.
They budgeted $5,000 for building each house.
Ese fue uno de los motivos que
It was such a low amount that the other cooperatives simply left.
una construcción de 75 metros cuadrados.
That price for a construction of this size was something no one even wanted to consider.
Eso no había que pensarlo dos veces, abandonar de una sola vez. Pero nosotros,
But we are responsible, and we are good workers.
y responsables trabajadores,
So we stayed, and we did the job. We built 7 houses.
Benito Cardozo, master builder, founded a small cooperative in 2004 which included his wife and daughter. The project at La Suiza was their first commission. They had high hopes.
Of all the cooperatives, we were the only ones that stayed.
They are still proud of the fact that they were the ones who had hung on. They stayed on, but they were left in a financial hole.
The president said that when you begin work, you must be paid half, and when you finish, the other half.
hasta la fecha tenemos más de,
But now, all these months later, they still haven't paid
no hay
us.
forma de que nos paguen.
6 months after the broadcast, we went to look at La Suiza. Not a single new house had been completed, and the work on the nearby project seemed, for the moment at least, abandoned. With all the country's wealth, the question is, why does it seem so difficult to make things work?
This is the question we are all asking. The government is very inefficient. Remember, Chavez did not come to power at the head of a party, which had been solidified for years, with a capable leading elite that had studied the country's problems. He came at the head of an amorphous mass, which he picked from left and right, military and civilian. So, of course, when they did away with the old elites, who'd governed us for half a century, they substituted improvised, incompetent, unformed teams, and this is the result.
As for the president, he never stops looking for solutions. Hearing him tell the story, he was flying over a piece of land in the mountains to the north of Caracas when he realized that it could be turned into a new city, a socialist city.
La primera ciudad socialista, vaya ese aplauso. La primera ciudad socialista que está naciendo.
He devoted his Sunday program on July 22, 2007 to the new city and the eventual relocation of the people there. The first residents to be moved, according to the plan, would be from Federico Quiros, a shanty town in the north of Caracas. Nelson Mora is an activist in the barrio. He firmly believes in the president and his policies.
We
are very proud to have a president who is identified with the people and wants to help the masses, including a whole variety of people who had been excluded for 40 years. And we want to help the president.
But as he talked and met with people in the neighborhood, he found that many of them were not ready to relocate to the new city.
We have
people with degrees, lawyers, accountants, politicians, people that were born here and still live here.
The more Nelson listened, the more he felt that he had to speak up for his community.
A ver, levanten la mano de los que se van a mudar para acá. Dime, compadre.
Buenos días, señor presidente.
Buenos días, hermano.
Nosotros somos el equipo promotor.
He attended a lo Presidente, nervous but determined.
Dígame, ¿ustedes son de los consejos comunales de dónde, compañero, camarada?
Federico Quirós.
Ah, ¿tú vives en Federico Quirós?
Sí, estoy aquí porque quiero decir unas cosas.
Gathering his courage, he tried to tell the president that most of the residents of Federico Quirós would not agree to relocate, and if he, the president, had been told otherwise, he had been deceived.
Fíjate, tú estás diciendo ya que a mí me están engañando. ¿De dónde sacas tú eso?
The president barely heard him out.
Una mentira, hermano.
He couldn't have been deceived. There was no way.
¿Dónde sacas tú eso?
Where did he get that idea?
¿Y cuál es el engaño?
En el momento me sentí mal, ¿no?
At that moment, I felt bad. I closed my eyes and felt tears. And I said, my God, why does the president treat me like this? The commander-in-chief, the leader of this process.
I suspect, he said, that Nelson Mora might be defending other interests. In other words, he was an infiltrator, because here he was attacking and throwing stones at everybody. At a lo Presidente, at Chavez, at the ministers, everyone.
There is a paradox here. The freedom of expression exists. Even though the president attacks us constantly, we do have freedom of expression because we are not afraid of the president and his bluster. The people who do not have freedom of expression are his supporters.
This was a lesson learned by Eleazar Diaz Rangel, the editor of the most popular paper in Venezuela, Últimas Noticias, one of Chavez's most staunch allies. But in February 2008, Últimas Noticias came out with a front-page headline that public health care was in a coma. Almost immediately, Chavez was on television.
Yo le preguntaría a Últimas Noticias, ¿no? A Últimas Noticias, en honor a la objetividad periodística. Un verdadero ejemplo como para un buen profesor de ética periodística, ¿no? De cómo se falta a la verdad.
Pues Chávez dedicó 50 minutos en televisión.
Chavez attacked the editor on television for 50 minutes, scolding him and the owners of the paper, questioning their ethics. He made sure that everyone understood that he was attacking his staunchest ally, a heavyweight, the most respected journalist in Venezuela.
Ahora, esto es guerra mediática. Ni Últimas Noticias se salva, pues, de apuntar sus cañones en función de los intereses de la oligarquía criolla y del imperialismo norteamericano.
When we asked Diaz Rangel his reaction, he defended the president.
En general a la gente no le gusta la crítica, ¿no? Es una conducta humana, parece.
People don't like criticism. It's human nature.
Como él tiene todo un mundo de crítica en los medios de comunicación, la oposición, etcétera. Seguramente.
And since the president is always criticized by the opposition,
de su lado o del lado que de gente que la hace sin ninguna
when he hears criticism from his own side, even with no bad intention, he looks at it in the same way as if it is said by the opposition.
De la oposición.
Ninguno se atreve a esbozar la más mínima crítica.
No one dares to voice the slightest criticism of the government, not even Diaz Rangel.
Y además el mensaje está muy claro.
So the message to his followers was, if I do it to Rangel, who is the editor of one of the most popular papers in Venezuela, who is my friend, I am capable of doing it to others. And he has.
Saludamos al nuevo ministro de Interior y de Justicia, Ramón Rodríguez Chacín. Bienvenido de nuevo, ministro de Infraestructura, ratificado.
Chavez has made over 130 changes to his cabinet in the last 9 years.
Ratificada. Felicitaciones, Yubirí.
January 2008 was the 6th major reshuffle.
Felicitamos. Ratificado. Luis Acuña.
They would all become familiar to the people through their required weekly participation in A lo Presidente.
Jesús Mantilla, ministro para la Salud, ratificado.
You can't be a member of the team who says, you know what, I don't want to go to A lo Presidente this week. I've got serious things to do down at the ministry. Can't say that. Because the next thing that happens is that, they change the locks on your office door and your desk is cleared.
José Ramón Rivero, ministro para el Trabajo y la Seguridad Social, ratificado.
I once asked a minister what he felt about being forced to listen to Chavez's speeches for 5 and 6 hours at a time. And he just grinned and he said, no comment.
Nicia Maldonado, ministra para los pueblos indígenas, ratificada.
Many of the ministers only see the president at the broadcasts, where they have to come prepared for any question thrown at them on live television.
Bueno, nosotros tenemos todavía para este año un recurso, David.
Por entregar al presidente 1,4 billones de bolívares aproximadamente.
¿Cuáles son esos 7, Mantilla? Nómbremelos rápido, por favor.
Some make it, others don't.
Que hemos visto cómo sus ministros tiemblan.
We have seen how the ministers tremble at the possibility of being questioned during the show, something the president will do.
Mi comandante, en Aragua tenemos en el municipio Antonio José de Sucre 1.
No me diga los municipios, no hace falta. Aragua 1.
It's created a kind of hothouse atmosphere where people feel like they're walking on a tightrope. They feel exposed and vulnerable. There is in Chavez a recognition of this. I think he likes that situation.
Saludo a Elías Jaua, el ministro de Agricultura.
Chavez may like it that way, but his officials often emerge devastated.
Yo puedo entender y podemos entender que allí haya tierra ociosa.
3 hours into a generally calm program in Barinas, his home state, Chavez launched into the subject of unused lands.
De la capital de Barinas, señor alcalde.
No one would come out unscathed.
Señor secretario de Estado, señor general comandante de guarnición, ¿cómo es que ustedes permiten esto? Yo no sé cómo lo permitimos. ¿Dónde está el presidente del Instituto de Tierra? ¿Cómo es que tú permites esto? ¿Cómo es? Explícame, a ver.
Ciertamente, comandante, en la agenda de la
¿Qué es lo que está
institución-
pasando? ¿Tendré yo que venirme yo mismo a tomar estas tierras?
No, comandante.
¿Cómo
vamos a
hacemos?
aplicar-
No hay ejército. ¿Dónde está el ejército aquí? ¿Dónde está la gobernación? ¿Dónde está el Instituto de Tierra Regional? ¿Dónde están ustedes, pues? No hay nada aquí. Soy yo el que debo venir aquí a tomar la tierra.
El programa dominical del presidente se convierte no solamente
The President's Sunday Show becomes not only a place where decisions are made,
sino un espacio en el que se exhibe
but a
cómo
place where
se toman
decision-making is
decisiones y
exhibited,
cómo el presidente toma
showing how the
buenas
President makes the good
decisiones mientras que
decisions
los
while the ministers
se
make
equivocan.
mistakes.
Ministro de Alimentación, ¿cuánto de caraota importamos el año pasado? ¿Cuánto?
El 80%.
80% de las caraotas las estamos importando. Y la leche, y la carne. Eso no se puede.
Es un mecanismo, es un dispositivo para preservar al presidente
It's a
de las
mechanism,
malas
a device to keep the President from bad decision-making.
porque quien aparece siempre como culpable,
Those who always appear guilty of the mistakes are the ministers,
que son juzgados por el propio presidente,
who are judged by the President in front of 15 million viewers.
de espectadores.
Loyo, ¿cómo hacemos? Dime.
Comandante, la única reflexión aquí posible es que no hay excusa. Y de este mismo momento asumo toda la responsabilidad.
An abject apology and promises to do better met with the audience's approval.
Son focas que aplauden. Usted no ha visto, son unas focas.
They are seals applauding.
Personas que lo único que hacen es
It's people who only pay attention to what the boss says applaud him, praise him, but never contradict him.
I see left-wing old friends, irreverent fighters, sitting there like perfect idiots. That's a painful spectacle.
There was one old fighter who wouldn't play the game. The old mentor, the one who shared with Chavez the early dreams of an enlightened socialist democracy, and who warned him of the dangers ahead, Luis Miquelena.
I separated from him and would not accept any sort of reconciliation. Each time he crosses another line, each time he becomes more distant from me. More and more he is denying what he once offered the country, denying what he promised to Venezuela, this country of ours that has been subject to one of the most spectacular frauds known in history.
After Miquelena departed, the one person who Chavez admired and listened to was Castro. Chavez had been to Cuba after he was released from prison. Then he went back as president in 2000 with his wife at his side. He made a speech at the University of Havana. Journalist John Lee Anderson was in the audience.
Fidel, Raul, and the other members of the Cuban Politburo listened in rapt attention to Hugo Chavez as he spoke about his plans, about his hopes for revolutionary union in the Americas, for a new kind of relationship between developing countries and the great powers of the world. And Fidel was probably thinking to himself, where was this kid 30 years ago when I needed him, you know? Oil-rich, willing to build revolution, willing to turn Venezuela into an ally of isolated Cuba. But there, you know, there it was beginning to happen.
Miquelena, who was still supporting Chavez at that time, had been worried about Chavez trying to imitate Castro.
I told Chavez, you can't do what Castro did after the Sierra Maestra. You can't do that after an election. These are totally different situations. Chavez did not have a clear idea of the difference between a revolution and a social transformation, with different changes and reforms that the country really needed at that time.
They were united by ideological affinity, hostility towards the U.S., and affection for each other.
Chavez broke the mold in terms of kind of regard and respect that most Latin American leaders paid to Fidel. It was clear that he looked to him as a mentor, as a kind of philosophical soulmate, as someone he truly admired as a hero, in an almost boyish way.
In his first few years, Chavez hardly mentioned the empire, as he now calls the United States. But as his friendship with Castro grew, his rhetoric became more and more incendiary.
La CIA anda regada por todos lados. Hace poco me dijo Fidel, Chávez, cuídate, porque esta es la máquina de matar más perfecta que se haya inventado. Venezuela ocupa uno de los primeros lugares en la atención del imperio y sus laboratorios de guerra psicológica, de guerra económica, de sabotaje.
Chavez is in urgent need of an epic. He doesn't have an epic story, and I think it pains him very much. Chavez didn't get to power by toppling a dictator. He hasn't been invaded by anyone. He's yelling at Bush to see if he gets a response. He needs great enemies, because you can't maintain such high verbal temperature and keep saying, I'm a great revolutionary, if you are not dangerous.
And he's absolutely convinced that, or appears to be anyway, that George Bush goes to bed every night thinking of ways to assassinate Hugo Chavez.
¿Ustedes creen que es casualidad que el mismísimo George Bush, el presidente imperial, haya dicho, atacándonos a nosotros, diciendo que somos unos terroristas?
It's only a matter of speeches. Big speeches, nothing happens. You know why? Because Venezuela is selling about 1.5 5 million barrels per day of crude and products to the United States. Most of the crude oil which goes to the United States is heavy crude. That heavy crude is processed in some special refineries in the United States, and that crude cannot go to other places. Then Chavez cannot cut the supplies to the United States. If Chavez cuts the supplies to the United States, he will remain in power few weeks.
The relations with Castro became even closer. Seeing the two together in the media became routine. They were seen in official meetings, unofficial meetings, and celebrations. Then there were the agreements. Chavez gave oil. Castro gave good advice, experts, doctors, and key security forces.
Cuba today is, by and large, subsidized by Venezuela.
How are you, Fidel? Very well, thank you, and you? Very well.
It is a rare Sunday when Chavez does not mention Fidel in his broadcast. No matter the subject of the day, he calls out to him.
How are you, Fidel? Aquí desde Barinas te saludamos, esta tierra que te quiere mucho. How are you, Fidel?
Why he greets him in English is not clear, but it's obvious that Castro is never too far from his mind.
Ponemos de pie para darle un abrazo caluroso a nuestro hermano.
Chavez has essentially saved Fidel Castro's revolution on the very eve of his death. I mean, Fidel can go more or less peacefully into the night knowing that at least for some years more, as long as Chavez is alive, Cuba will be all right.
Chavez makes sure that Castro knows that. He gives him a signed copy of the painting he made when he was in prison and sings the song that as a youngster he used to sing about Che Guevara.
Yo cantaba eso en los cuarteles. Caminando entre valles y montañas, vaga siempre tu imagen guerrillera, y tu sangre corre ya por nuestras venas y se agita en los pechos bolivianos. Che Guevara. Yo canto muy mal, pero canto desde el alma. Y se agita en los pechos bolivianos.
Unlike Fidel, Chavez had to deal with the democratic opposition. By 2004, they had gathered over 3 million signatures for a petition to recall the president, as permitted by the Constitution. The opposition lost. Then, to their horror, they saw their names and details leaked to the internet, effectively circulating as a blacklist. Jobs were lost, careers ruined. It was a warning not to oppose the Bolivarian Revolution. Two years later, with his new social programs underway, Chavez rallied his supporters and won his re-election.
He won by the highest percentage of any presidential election since democracy began in 1958. So that there was this feeling that he was invincible.
So I think at that moment, Chavez says, I have a solid support. I've been here 8 years. The people agree with me, which I think is true. People agree that they like this kind of democracy, this participatory democracy. They agree that the money that comes in through oil must be distributed for social policies, that the missions are doing their job. People voted, I think, for that. But Chavez had in his head something else besides that. And that idea that he has, he begins to develop it in 2007.
The idea was a further turn to the left, to be carried out through a reform to the Constitution. He also found an opportunity to silence one of his most vociferous critics, RCTV, Radio Caracas Television.
Que esa concesión es eterna. Se le acaba en marzo la concesión de televisión.
In the spring of 2007, Chavez announced that the 20-year broadcast license for RCTV would not be renewed. He made no secret of his feelings.
Nueva concesión para ese canal golpista de televisión que se llamó Radio Caracas Televisión. Se acaba la concesión.
Ana Jesús es la número 70, pero la vida le hará una jugada.
Chavez saw RCTV as a political opponent. His supporters saw it as the channel on which they saw their soap operas in the evening.
Porque camino a la meta, se enamorará de ella.
And the fact that Chavez was able to close that down without taking into account the needs and the wishes of ordinary people seems to have started people thinking, well, maybe this man is not necessarily, Chavez is not necessarily on our side.
The closing was widely unpopular and became a cause for university students who took to the streets in the name of freedom of speech. Ignoring the protests, which were reported all over the world, Chavez went on with his main agenda, the constitutional reform.
La línea central del programa de hoy, amigas y amigos de toda Venezuela y del mundo, es la Constitución, la propuesta de reforma constitucional y su esencia. ¿Cuál es la médula?
The essence of his reform, according to the president, was a transition towards a 21st century socialism.
El pueblo venezolano, el poder popular.
The slogan was popular power. 69 articles were to be modified, some of which would make fundamental changes to the Constitution.
Miren, lo que va a ocurrir en diciembre es decisivo para la revolución. Decisivo. Porque esta Constitución...
The most controversial changes dealt with strengthening the state's involvement in the economy and centralization of power in the hands of the president, who would have the right to be re-elected indefinitely.
Solo propongo, ustedes, como dice Daniel, tienen en sus manos la decisión. Estoy seguro que la gran mayoría del pueblo la va a aprobar. Yo no soy dueño de la verdad. Y estoy, por supuesto, de acuerdo en que se mejore, más bien, no es que estoy de acuerdo, clamo, pido que se mejore la propuesta que yo he hecho.
That Sunday, the show was attended by members of the international press.
Sheung, de Asia Weekly. Ni hao. Ni hao, vamos a darle un aplauso de bienvenida. Aquí está también ciudadano franco-canadiense, Jean-Guy Allard, radicado en Cuba, trabaja en el diario Granma. También está un periodista británico, es decir, de la Gran Bretaña, Rory Carroll.
Rory Carroll is a journalist for The Guardian, a liberal British newspaper. He was attending Allo Presidente for the first time.
El Guardián.
Suddenly, the TV cameras turn on to me, and I can see myself on the TV cameras, and I'm aware that I'm actually on live on Venezuelan TV.
¿Sí hablas español?
Bastante, sí.
¿Tú que eres de la Gran Bretaña?
No, soy irlandés, de hecho, pero...
Ah, eres irlandés. ¿Qué pregunta tienes tú para mí?
Well, then he asked me what was my question. Stupidly, and it was stupid on my part, I hadn't actually prepared one, really, so I had to kind of think fast.
Entonces, una pregunta sobre la Constitución, el cambio...
Rory's question was about the reform, why the president wanted the right to be elected indefinitely while not granting the same rights to the 23 state governors.
Good question.
Yeah, I mean, fairly straightforward, almost banal question, really. But of course, the answer was extraordinary.
Rory trabaja para un diario londinense. Entonces, claro, en Europa hay mucho cinismo. Rory, allá en Europa, donde tú eres, yo creo que Europa...
So the answer started off with the cynicism my question had betrayed. The cynicism, not just of me personally, but also the cynicism of the fact of what I represented. And certainly I represented Europe.
¿Qué cosa, no? La Europa. La Europa. La culta Europa. La culta Europa. Y nosotros somos los bárbaros, los indios, los negros, los sudacas. Vaya qué cinismo el de Europa. Chávez el tirano, Chávez el caudillo, Chávez el que se quiere perpetuar. Y allá tienen reyes, compadre. ¿Alguien ha elegido reyes? Te pregunto yo a ti, ¿eligen reyes ustedes?
He wanted to know Rory's opinion about royalty.
¿Qué opinas tú de eso? A ver, tu opinión como...
Well, mira, repito, yo soy, no soy irlandés, pero soy republicano.
Rory replied that he was both Irish and Republican, so it wasn't a system that he wanted to defend.
Entonces, pero no importa porque
He also added modestly that it didn't really matter what someone like him thought.
Él me responde que no importa porque es sobre este país. A mí sí me importa.
And then he kind of looked around to people to go like, did you hear what he said? Did you guys hear what he said? And at this point, my heart sank. I was thinking, oh God, now what? What's going to happen? And because I was thinking, what did I say?
Él viene a decir que no importa la pregunta que yo le hago. No importa, ¿cómo que no importa? A nosotros sí nos importa. Todo lo que pasa en este mundo nos importa, compañero. Nos importa el destino de tu pueblo, el irlandés. Nos importa el destino de los pueblos de Europa. Nos importa el destino de los pueblos de África. Todo nos importa, porque es el destino de los que vivimos en este planeta. Todos vivimos en este planeta.
An hour and a half into the show, he came back to answer Rory's question about why the president and not the governors would have the right to repeated re-election.
Porque yo lo concibo así.
This time, he was more direct.
Una concepción política, pues.
This was the way he wanted it,
Sencillamente es una concepción
his
política.
own political concept.
7 de octubre, pues, vamos a dedicar este programa al pueblo venezolano, al poder popular, a la reforma.
For the next few weeks, he would continue to campaign for the reform.
Estar enamorado es leer la reforma en la mañana. Estar enamorado es enamorado.
He was in love, he sang, with the reform,
Enamorado de la reforma es estar enamorado de la patria.
in love with the motherland,
Estar enamorado de la revolución.
in love with the revolution,
Estar enamorado de nuestro pueblo.
and in love with the people. But many of those people, his people, were hurting. There were long lines in the government food store, Mercal, which sells price-controlled goods. With the high inflation and shortages of basic foods, there was not much to buy. In the meantime, subsidized foodstuffs were carried across the porous border to Colombia, where they could be sold for a large markup. A tank of gas bought in Venezuela for 12 cents a gallon could bring a fast $50 profit a few steps away in Colombia. And there was the problem of safety. Caracas has had the second highest murder rate in all of the Americas, and the numbers are growing every month, as are the numbers of armed robberies. Bars help sometimes, but not much. I put up the bars for protection, said the pharmacist. Have there been robberies?
Semanalmente.
Every week. Chavez has been criticized that he won't address the problems of crime. He denies it.
El problema, uno de los más graves problemas nuestros, es la seguridad ciudadana, el orden público. Hay mucha delincuencia. Es uno de los grandes problemas del mundo capitalista. También me han atacado por ahí, no, que Chávez no le hizo caso en la propuesta al problema de la seguridad ciudadana. ¿Cómo que no? Si esto está pensado exclusivamente en esa dirección.
In the meantime, there have been kidnappings and murders, especially in the border towns. There were over 2,000 kidnappings in the last 9 years, almost all for money. Porfirio de Villa is a veterinarian. 2 years ago, his father, a farmer, stepped out of his house in the morning and didn't return. The family received calls asking for hundreds of thousands in US dollars, which they didn't have and couldn't get. Then the calls stopped. The father never came home.
En todo ese tiempo nosotros no habíamos recibido ni llamada ni apoyo
And in all this time, we didn't get one call or support from any politician
o persona de la
or
cual
anyone who should be responsible for our security in an official manner.
somos solo cifras, solo números, solo estadísticas.
We are only ciphers, numbers, statistics.
Me da mucho dolor
It gives me great pain to tell you on international television
Venezuela no es nuestra.
that Venezuela is not ours.
Venezuela se ha transformado en
Venezuela has been transformed into a region of crime, a region where life is worthless,
donde hay 100,000 homicidios.
where there are 100,000 homicides a year, and we are not even at war.
1,600 secuestros.
1,600 kidnappings, and we are not at war.
Y nuestro gobierno dice que es socialista, pero los pobres.
Our government is socialist, but it's the poor who are unimportant.
Porque no asesinan.
They don't assassinate the rich, they assassinate the poor.
It's shocking to come into Caracas nearly a decade on and see that most of what Hugo Chavez was railing in anger about being left with, a failed society, misery, insecurity, unequal distribution of wealth, is still here. That despite surely thousands of hours of speeches and many billions of dollars of oil wealth pumped into the economy, we don't see huge changes. We see, in fact, that most of Hugo Chavez's revolutionary programs, his inventions to ameliorate and alleviate the social ills at home, simply have not worked.
El abuelito. ¿Dónde está el abuelito que me pidió la sopa?
Francia will have none of that.
Eso es mentira.
It's a lie.
Mira, mi amiga.
Look here, my friend.
Si aquí no estuviera Chávez,
If it were not for Chavez,
esto hubiese sido
things would be
de
much
peor.
worse.
Yo no soy letrada.
I'm not a learned person.
No soy estudiada, amiga.
I'm not educated.
Pero me lo enseñó la calle.
I was taught by the streets.
Porque fui pateada.
I was trampled on.
Fui utilizada.
I was used.
Pero mi presidente me enseñó
But my president
a
taught me to
valorarme,
value myself,
a
to love
quererme.
myself.
Nunca habíamos tenido un presidente como
We
el
have never had a
presidente
president like President Chavez.
Chávez. Es lo máximo.
He is the best,
Es lo máximo.
the very best.
Yo creo que la historia va a tener que reconocerle a Chávez.
I believe that history will have to acknowledge that Chavez has turned the social question into the great Venezuelan theme,
Tema venezolano, el issue más
the most important issue of the country.
Porque en los 20 años anteriores a Chávez,
In the 20 years before Chavez,
empobrecimiento que vivió el
the
país,
terrible impoverishment that took place in this country, until 60% of the people were poor,
eso había desaparecido del radar de los partidos políticos.
simply disappeared from the radar of the political parties that had governed Venezuela for half a century.
Chávez rescató el dolor.
Chavez rescued the hidden pain of an impoverished country and put it on the table.
Y hoy, en el
And
discurso
today, in any
político,
political
empresarial,
discourse,
cultural, o el que sea,
commercial, cultural, or any other,
el tema de la pobreza y de la lucha
the
contra
theme
la
of
pobreza,
poverty is essential,
eso se le debe.
thanks to Chavez.
It was voting day for the reform that would allow Chavez to be re-elected indefinitely. The two sides were hopeful. The race was tight. Then, surprise. Chavez lost. The margin was small, officially less than 2%. But for him and his supporters, it was huge. It was the first loss he had ever suffered. Chavez accepted the defeat and comforted his crestfallen followers.
No se sientan tristes, no, ni apesadumbrados, no. Yo creo que la democracia venezolana, lo decía hoy cuando fui a votar esta mañana, va madurando y cada proceso de estos que vivimos, cada jornada electoral, cada jornada política va permitiendo que nuestra democracia, que nuestro país continúe madurando.
But then, after 2 days of celebration by the opposition, Chavez reappeared on television, grim and angry.
No tendría nada que celebrar. Nosotros no hemos perdido nada. Y prepárense, porque vendrá una nueva ofensiva con la propuesta de reforma, esa o transformada simplificada, pero yo estoy seguro, ya me han llegado aquí cartas.
He was not about to give up. Just as he had done once before, he would prevail.
Para mí, esto es otro, no es ninguna derrota. Para mí este es otro por ahora. Por ahora.
Compañeros, lamentablemente, por ahora, los objetivos que nos planteamos no fueron logrados en la ciudad capital.
After the defeat, the signs saying por ahora, for now, sprang up all over the city, trying to revive the magic that got Chavez to the presidency. But there was a difference. The first time, it was taken as a promise. Now, it seemed more of a threat. The nation's decision will stand, he said, but only por ahora, for now. Next time on Frontline.
Baby boomers will be facing a very different retirement than their parents.
You've saved.
I just throw the money in the pot and hope it grows.
You've invested.
I thought when he retired it was going to be a lot different, you know, money-wise.
You've dreamed of retiring.
One of your biggest problems is you're all going to live too long.
It's the end of retirement.
Can you afford to retire? Next time on Frontline.
Frontlines, the Hugo Chavez Show, is available on DVD with Spanish secondary audio. To order, visit shoppbs.org or call 1-800-PLAY-PBS.
Frontline is made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. With major funding from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, helping to build a more just world. And additional funding from the Park Foundation.